a farmer in the west of England who doesn't use the internet, never had a mobile phone, like not particularly old, just not interested, doesn't want the internet, has a nice life. He just found somebody in his local town and just paid them to do it online for him. And it's so people often find these workarounds themselves. So I think you have to provide the workarounds, but also recognize some people just don't want to use online services. That feels very odd for somebody who spends their career with digital in their title. But we need to build for everybody.
Hi, welcome to the show. My pleasure to be here as your host. Just call me T+. This show is called InnoMinds, a forum for leaders in tech and politics to discuss how to solve today's problems with today's tools. Today, we talk to Tom Reed, CEO of Government Digital Service in the UK, and Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. In this episode, we discuss data, digital ranking, and ensuring government services work for non-internet users. Okay, so before we get started, I want to introduce our two guests today. Tom Reed is the CEO of Government Digital Service in the UK. Tom previously worked at the Ministry of Justice as Chief Digital Officer. During this time, he was responsible for carrying out digital service reforms in UK prisons. Hi, Tom.
Hi, nice to see you.
Audrey Tang is Taiwan's digital minister. She became Taiwan's youngest minister in 2016 when she headed the public digital innovation space. She has been a hacktivist for over 2 decades. She is also a promoter of open source innovation. Hi, Audrey.
Good local time, everyone.
To kick things off, I want to ask, what are your biggest pet peeves when it comes to website design?
Yeah, thank you. It's a jokey opening question, but actually, I think there's a lot wrong with website design at the moment. I went to buy some running shoes over the weekend, and the website I went onto, first it said I needed to accept cookies. Then it asked for my location. Then it asked to send me notifications through the browser. Then it asked me to sign up for the newsletter. And by that time, I was sick of the website, and I hadn't even tried to search for the shoes I was looking for. And I think the problem is a lot of websites are being designed by marketing people at the moment rather than product people. So I have a lot of problems with websites.
Well, as digital minister, I'm committed to ensure everyone has equal access, and including people with disabilities. So my pet peeve is going to a website and see an image-only captcha with no way around it. That's simply not acceptable. Nowadays, there's a lot of alternative technologies that does not actually require solving a captcha, let alone a image-only one. And which is why we're adopting the GovUK design system for our websites. And also we're ready to work with the World Web Consortium and the Accessibility Workgroup to make the web friendly for everyone.
So by CAPTCHA, you mean a system where a website asks you to pick all images with a certain feature, like cars, right?
And the thing is that AI systems solve that very quickly now. So it's basically like reverse discrimination.
Good observation. On another note, I want to talk about the pandemic. Tom, you became the Chief Executive Officer of Government Digital Service in 2021, during a time when COVID was causing massive disruptions worldwide. How did you think about building services in a time when people's experiences were changing so much?
Yeah, the pandemic has just supercharged what was already happening. And I think it sort of jumped us ahead about 5 years. In the UK, we already have the highest e-commerce use across Europe, for example. So we're a fairly digital literate country. The pandemic just changed things so that people expect all services to work by default from their mobile phone. Bit of an exaggeration, but mostly true. People expect to be able to do the majority of things on their phone. And so what that meant is that they were interacting with government services. Sometimes, they would have been totally fine to do that via a paper form or a call center, but it was expectations have been heightened. So what it means is where people are getting services that, as Audrey said earlier, where people are seeing services that are not accessible, or services that don't work on their mobile phone because perhaps they don't have the latest one, they were getting really quite frustrated. So our job, I think, is to meet those heightened expectations and take digital in government to the next level.
What about in Taiwan? Audrey, how do you build services that are pandemic proof?
Yeah, I think in Taiwan, we're really fortunate that we've already had a lot of mutual trust between the civic technologists and the municipal and the central level governments. So when we, for example, needed a way to visualize the mask rationing system, or if we need to invent a efficient contact tracing system that's matching the speed of the alpha and then later delta variants, it's not the GovTech people doing that, it's the civic tech people doing that. And the good thing about this is that because they are the people who fight for dignity and personal data rights and privacy and so on, it feels less like a state surveillance thing when all the parameters and all the code are created by the human rights activists and the hacktivists. And so the pandemic, I think, also supercharged not just digital services, but also the career public service thought around public services delivered in the digital form. Previously, it was us providing the open data and maybe people do some visualization and so on, which is really good. But nowadays, it's like critical infrastructure that's used by tens of millions of people are actually the product of the people, public, private partnerships.
Audrey was talking about collaboration with civil society in Taiwan. Tom, I want to ask whether this type of collaboration exists in the UK?
Yeah, it's really fascinating to hear what's happening in Taiwan. I think we don't quite have the same relationship in the UK to the same extent. We've had a commitment to open data for at least a decade, and so we do provide a lot of data out in machine readable format for people to use. People do use that, but it tends to be more academics than it is sort of activists, rights groups, and so on. I think the big exception, I would say, is the people who founded GDS, the people on whose shoulders I'm standing. A lot of them, Tom Loosemore and others, they came from that civic tech background where they were using open data provided by the government to build services for the public. A lot of it was around increasing transparency in members of parliament and their voting patterns and those sorts of things. So I think a lot of that sort of civic tech ethos is the reason that the Government Digital Service was founded. I'm not seeing tons of it in the UK at the moment. It's certainly not heavily on my radar in the same way it is on Audrey's. I think there's an action here. I don't know if we're taking actions from this this thing, but I think I'm going to go away and look into this a bit more and see if there's more connections that we could make.
Thank you to both of you for your insights. Tom, I want to ask you what you think good website design looks like.
Yeah, the fundamental problem with a lot of website design is they're designed to feed the messaging that somebody internally wants. So in government, it's we government want you citizens to know this bit of information. That's not how people work, and it's just not how people's brains work. People don't browse government, right? They don't go, I'm going to go to a government website and browse today. You go because you either want a bit of information, you need to understand something, you need to answer to a question, or you need to apply for a thing, or find out if you need to apply for a thing. So you're quite target oriented when you go to a government website. So our fundamental design principle in the UK is really genuinely understand what people are trying to do and then make it as simple as possible to get to that endpoint as quickly as possible. And everything else can be somewhere else. Like put that right at the back of the website, hide all that content that we want the public to know. And what that means is doing a lot of upfront research, not on requirements and the sort of the way that IT services tend to get built, but really understand what people are trying to achieve, build things and then release it very, very quickly, and then check, literally watch people using what you've just built and see if they can get to what they want very quickly. And it's that constant iterative feedback loop is the only way that you build things that people choose to use and are happy to use over and over again.
In a way, can we say that you are attempting to align with the standards of the private sector?
You've raised a really interesting point there, which is, we often fall into this trap of saying, oh, we're just going to try to design like we're Amazon or design like we're Uber. It's a very different user experience going onto Amazon to buy whatever and going to a government website, because there's this level of intimidation that people feel because it's a monopoly service, it's the government, and so people approach it quite differently. And the other contextual thing that we need to do more of in the UK is not think that all services are the same. So we know, for example, that universal credit, which is our main benefit, social benefit in the UK, something like 89% of people start that journey on their mobile phone. So they're used to going through their mobile phone, doing that. For tax self-assessment, only about 30% people do it on their mobile phone. Most people set aside some time and they get a computer and they sit down and do that. And they're quite different user journeys and different interactions. And we need to make sure we're designing with that context as well as just what are people trying to achieve, because otherwise we'll get it wrong.
This naturally leads me to a new question. How do you design government services to work well on mobile phones?
Well, first and foremost, everything we do now, including tax, is designed to be mobile first. So we design everything for mobile, and we don't make any assumptions about what design of phone people have or how much internet they have. I love the concept of broadband being sort of a public right. In reality, though, we have people who are very low income, who have let's say an Android phone that's 5 years out of date, and their data that they pay for is really expensive, and it's a big part of their sort of weekly expenditure. And so we make sure that when we're designing for mobile, we don't require people to download any apps. There are options for app-based services, and we make sure we build with progressive enhancement. So the service works very, very quickly with just pure HTML, because we don't want to use people's data if we don't need to. And also, as I said, people are coming to do something. They're not coming to see this amazing website. Like, they're coming just to achieve something. So making it as simple as possible is another good design principle, I think. It's quite hard to explain that to people, though, because you say to people, look, it's intentionally boring, and it's quite a difficult message, particularly to people who want to make announcements and so on.
I want to pass the question on to Audrey. How does Taiwan build good user experience online?
Everything Tom said and more, because our government digital service guideline is based on the GDS standard. Now, we're a little bit more fortunate because in Taiwan, people get unlimited data for just about 15 euros a month. And so people generally assume that there is a broadband connection available, which means that you can always reach out for video chat and things like that in the case that your service goes wrong or things like that. And this also enabled a different setup because we can then connect the local helpers. They could be a staff at a local pharmacy, a ubiquitous convenience store staff, someone in the local clinic or in the boroughs or district office and so on, who can then connect with experts in the central or municipal governments. And they too form a team to serve the people who may have the broadband subscription but do not have a lot of ease navigating it. And so I think this empowering the people who assist the local people is an additional design philosophy that we have. And the goal is that people get to choose paper or digital, or people get to choose their journey starting from meeting someone versus going into a website and so on. But in the back end, it's an integrated system. So we do not have to develop multiple systems in order to enable this kind of adaptability.
As well as building good online experiences, both of you also have to think about offline service provision. Tom, how do you build services for non-internet users?
Yeah, it's vital that we provide ways for people to access services without them being online. Like, it'd be great if everybody was online. It would make life much easier, but that's not how society works. So we've got a principle that we are digital by default, but not by exclusion. So every service that we put live that's digital, we have an offline channel. And it's really interesting when you look at the reasons people don't use online services. There's sort of this assumption about the types of people who don't use online services, but some of them that there are communities that don't use online services because they don't really understand that they're there. So we have communities in London that are largely from other countries, that are people who have immigrated, first generation immigrants who don't know about these digital services. So part of it is getting the message out there that these services are online and easy to use. I also heard a really interesting story last week about a farmer in the west of England who doesn't use the internet, never had a mobile phone, like not particularly old, just not interested, doesn't want the internet, has a nice life. And a researcher was talking to him about, like, so how do you do your, how do you register your online farming? I don't really understand farming, but how do you record all of the things you've done to get your subsidies and so on? And what the government had offered was you can drive for about 45 miles to a center where you can go and do that in person. He just found somebody in his local town and just paid them to do it online for him. And it's so people often find these workarounds themselves. So I think you have to provide the workarounds, but also recognize some people just don't want to use online services. That feels very odd to somebody who spends their career with digital in their title. But we need to build for everybody.
Ensuring that everyone has access to government services is indeed fundamental. Audrey, I want to pick up on something you said. Taiwanese services are built using GDS tools from the UK. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Our website design system is a carbon copy of the GDS design system, so much so that if you open the Moda website and the GDS website, they look like clones of each other.
How did this collaboration come about?
Yeah, did we sign an MOU or something? No, we didn't. It's just generous people at the GDS decides to choose a public license, a public code, so that not just the form system or the specific components like notify system and so on, but the entire way, so that the website has a consistent look and feel. It's just up there on the internet. And so because we see this guarantee that we will not be sued for copyright violations, we simply pick it up and used it. And so it's not a kind of licensing environment where Tom gets an application from the Taiwan government. It's entirely collaborated online.
So Tom, tell us about open source contribution from the UK government.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear. It's a founding principle of GDS to work in the open, and it's not just sort of like we're trying to do good in the world. It's a selfish thing as well, because if you make code open, people play with it, people experiment, people use it, and they feed back where they find bugs or they find security vulnerabilities. So it's really helpful. And we have also, so a number of countries around the world have taken gov.uk source code, forked it, and used it for their own. So if you look at the New Zealand government website, for example, it's exactly the same as gov.uk, except theirs is black and white and ours is blue and white. I think Greece has done the same. So it's great to see it. I think, and it is a founding principle. We'll continue with everything. The only things we don't put fully open source are where there are security implications of putting sensitive source code live. I think there are some challenges, though, that I don't know if you want to get onto, but I think there are some challenges with open source that Audrey and I have talked about before. So it's great that the New Zealand government and Taiwan has taken gov.uk and built their websites from it, but it does tend to be forking the code, developing in silos. And so what we're not doing is getting all of those learnings and those new features and those extra things and putting them back into a central pot. I feel like there's something we should be doing, sort of progressive digital governments around the world should be doing to bring, work collaboratively on a single source code set, so that we'll be able to use that and get benefits from what everyone's doing around the world, rather than just sort of going our separate ways. I don't have any solutions, by the way, but I think there's a problem there.
Indeed. Yeah, we learned that, for example, Estonia, Finland, Iceland have formed this consortium, not on everything public code, but around the X-Road core technologies. I think something like that is probably necessary going forward, because nowadays people care a lot about the software bill of materials, about the cybersecurity guarantees, and so on. And it's simply very wasteful for us to do the penetration testing and red teams and everything, so that if you send one pull request, all the 7 different governments have to redo the same cybersecurity audits. I mean, it's much easier if our cybersecurity labs can recognize each other, and at least on the cybersecurity arm, have this kind of collaboration as the Nordic countries already do. So my action item would be, sending a proposal, and this time we'll need an MOU for that.
Almost certainly.
Tom, I want to talk more about government digital service in the UK. They've done a lot of work promoting service integration, but at the same time the UK is behind in data integration. How is the UK thinking about this challenge?
Yeah, data is a challenge in the UK government. So the way that it works in the UK is we don't have ID cards, and we don't have a single identifying number. In fact, we have 22 identifying numbers, from your passport number to your health number, your national national identity number. There are lots of different numbers. None of them are unique, and none of them are ubiquitous, and none of them are like the number. And over the last sort of 20 years, there's been a number of political pushes for a national ID card or a national ID database. And each time that's been voted down. People in the UK don't like the concept of government overreach, and they don't like the concept of government being able to connect everything around you. Which, that's how our society works, right? We're a quite a libertarian, democratic nation. All fine. That's the context. Really hard if you're trying to design digital services based on data. So what we're trying to do at the moment is look at where do we want to get to over the next sort of 5 or 10 years. Everything we do at the moment, I think we need to continue. We need to continue building. So simple online digital services that don't require anything other than you arriving, filling in the form, and you're done, right? That needs to stay the same. What we really want to get to, though, is for people who are happy to connect their data, and this is a big change, I think, over COVID, is people have really accepted the kind of data that they're willing to give to private companies if they get a better service. I think that shifted the dial, certainly in the UK. Like, people are completely fine with giving their data to Google and to Facebook and to Amazon. Why shouldn't they be comfortable giving that data to government as well, if we can show that we're using it properly, if we allow them a route that doesn't require them to have all their data connected, and if we provide a much better user experience. So we want to look at personalized journeys based on data. So we want to go from a website where you fill in a form to somewhere that you log into, you connect all of the data from tax and your immigration status and your criminal record and your benefits and all your housing, have all that data connected in the same way that Estonia and Denmark and Singapore and other countries already do, and then be able to apply for things using just one click. So you gave the example of student loans, or I forget what it was, student finance in some way. That shouldn't really require you to fill in a form. It should say, this is what we know about you. Should we update your record based on that? And I'd love to get to the position where you can have that almost one-click interaction with government. Wouldn't really be one click, but you know what I mean. A few clicks interaction with government for people who are happy for government to connect their data. And then eventually you move beyond that and you get to proactive government, right? I shouldn't have to know what services government provides and has available by searching on a, albeit very nice website. We should be telling citizens, based on what we know about you, you're now eligible for this. Do you want us just to put it into your account? And I don't know if we'll ever get there, but that's what I'd like to push towards. But to do that, we need to start integrating data in a much more active way than we've ever done before. And it's quite hard.
Sounds like a big challenge. If I may make a comparison, though, the UK was ranked in the top 4 in the UN's e-government rankings in 2010, but now it is in around 11th place. Tom, what happened to the UK's rankings?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So I think the first UN e-government report came out in 2016. So not that long ago. So a number of things have changed. So I think some countries in the world have adapted to this data-centric, proactive, personalized digital services much faster than we have in the UK. And I think some of those countries have leapfrogged us for that reason. And I also think at the same time, the UN has changed its metrics to focus more on those things. So not only are we not leading in that, but that has a bigger status within the way that the UN report is calculated as well, which means we're dropping down further. I mean, I sort of don't care. So I think it's a good measure. I'm glad there is a UN index. Equally, my focus is much more to make sure that services are simple and accessible for citizens than we win, the race to the top. But it is an interesting measure, and it's something we're looking at quite closely.
Audrey, coming back to Taiwan, what are the main digital policy goals of the Ministry of Digital Affairs right now?
Yeah, MODA is founded with this idea called digital resilience for all, meaning that we need to quickly adapt and recover from, say, earthquakes, typhoons, maybe natural or human-made earthquakes and things like that. And this is really a number one priority for us because people understand from our own experience of having like 3 felt earthquakes every day somewhere in Taiwan, that if you do not have this kind of redundancy in the communication methods, and if the fiber optic line or submarine cable or things like goes away, then actually it's very difficult to know what's going on, and misinformation or even disinformation will run rampant. And so for the next couple of years, we're working to set up 700 satellite receivers of non-geostationary orbit satellites, and some fixed, but also some mounted, like on fire service trucks and so on, so that really there's broadband as a human right, even for places that has, wildfire or a lot of typhoons or earthquakes and things like that. And I believe it's very interesting that MODA, as a new ministry, have this digital resilience as the slogan, because everything else, spectrum allocation, service design, and so on, makes so much sense when people are encountering something that is urgent, like the pandemic or anything, right? So things like that, the pandemic or cyber attacks or things like that, raise the importance and urgency of digital service. But in the normal days, we're happy to stay in the background.
This will serve as a smooth transition for my next question to both of you. We've talked a lot about digital services today, but it is sometimes difficult to convince people why these are so important. So, how do you explain to someone the importance of digital services?
Yeah, it's a great question. Why do digital services matter? I think the first thing I'd say is digital is an adjective. It is not its own thing. It is describing the way that most citizens and other users interact with government. And that is fundamental. So we're not talking about specific individual services. We're talking about the whole interaction with government. And the reason that matters is if people see that government is not providing services in the way they expect, the easiest possible way, you lose trust. You lose trust between the citizen and the state. And that is a fundamental problem in the modern age, where democratic society needs to rebuild that trust in an age of misinformation, disinformation. And so the better your digital services are, the more transparent government feels, and the more trust you generate within your users. And I think that's why it matters more than anything else.
Yeah, so everything Tom said. And also, I think in Taiwan, in Mandarin, digital and plural are the same words, 数位. It means both digital and plural. And as a pluralistic society, we need to deliver the services in all the different ways, like 20 national languages, including the sign language. But there's only so much resource that a government has. There really is no way for us to take care of the entire long tail about a variety of needs and the urgency that differs from location to location. But through digital services, and especially through open data and public code, it is possible for people who care about, fixing my street and so on, to improve on the experience without being a government-paid public servant, which is why the digital allows for a pluralistic, almost a swarm-like experiment on how to deliver better services. And so it increased the bandwidth of democracy. It's no longer just 3 bits every 4 years. It's an ongoing, symmetric relationship between the citizens and the government.
We've been talking with Tom Reed and Audrey Tang about how digital services can empower people by letting them access the resources they actually need. In the next part, we'll talk more about digital reforms in the judicial system, so stay tuned. And if you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let us know what you think. See you next time.
The good thing, though, is the vast majority of people I've met work in government because they want to make life easier for citizens. They want to make life easier for the end user. That's why people work here. It's why we don't work, for, I'm not going to name companies, but why we don't work in the private sector is because everyone has this civic mindset that they're trying to do public good. And I think if you try to tap into that and create a community of practice, a community of people who really want to achieve the same things, you can often get past those sort of bureaucratic blockers. And we've had great success recently just by changing our attitude in the centre of government to department. So rather than saying, we must do this, we're mandating this is the rule, we go out and say, let's collaborate, let's work together and design something together. Because your users better than I do, and we have the power at centre to make something happen. So I think changing from the centre being telling people what to do to saying we can enable you, that's showing the biggest difference in my world. So hi, I'm Tom Reed. I'm the Chief Executive of the Government Digital Service in the UK, and see you on Taiwan Plus.
Hello, I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's Digital Minister. See you on Taiwan Plus.